The Self-Publishing Formula is looking for beta testers for its 101 course on self-publishing. After the success of the Advanced Facebook Ads for Authors course, Mark Dawson is now creating a course aimed solely at authors who are starting out. If you're trying to launch your first book or trying to become commercially successful with your books, then this course is for you. It will cover everything you need to set yourself up for success as an indie author. Beta testers will get the course for free in return for feedback. You can sign up for your chance to become a tester at selfpublishingformula.com and we'll notify those selected. Hello and welcome to podcast number 31 from the Self-Publishing Formula.
Two writers, one just starting out, the other a bestseller. Join James Bache and Mark Dawson and their amazing guests as they discuss how you can make a living telling stories. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello, Mark. Well, we're in America, aren't we?
Are we?
We are, because this is the 23rd of September, and by the magic of podcasting, we're actually in America at the moment, although we're not.
Yes.
We're obviously in the UK because we're recording this just before we leave. I'm getting a flight tomorrow, Mark's getting a flight next week. But we are going to be at Cmyk at the point that this podcast is released. And we can tell you we're going to gather some material. The last time we did Out and About, I guess, was London Book Fair. But we're going to get our microphones out, so to speak, at Cmyk. And we'll always do what we always do, which is try and seek out the value information, the tidbits that are making a difference to people's marketing and their book writing, and try and bring that to you in an episode. And I guess that's going to be the next one, so we'll aim to have that out on the 30th of September.
Yes, you'll be editing frantically on the plane back home.
Yeah, exactly. I never stop working, as you know. The other thing we're going to do, John Dyer and I are taking the opportunity to visit as many sort of writers as we can in the States. And we're just going to talk to each one of those and ask them a sort of similar set of formatted questions, really focused on what's working for them at the moment. A bit about where they're putting their money in terms of advertising and what sort of revenues they're receiving, and also just a little bit about what tweaks they've made that have made things better for them. We'll also talk to people, the questions we always like to hear about how people write, how often they write, or whether they plan, whether they're pantsers, and all that stuff. And we're going to bring you that episode, which will be a sort of good flavour of lots of different writers and lots of different voices recorded in the States. We'll bring you that episode probably, that will be, I guess, around the 7th of October. So a couple of specials from America coming up in the next few weeks. But as I say, at the moment, we're still in the UK and we have a great interview today. We've got a really interesting area, which is not one that perhaps naturally or comes naturally to writers. It's more on the creative side in terms of artwork, and that is we're going to talk to somebody who does book covers, aren't we, Mark?
We are, yes. We're going to be talking to Stuart Bache, who is my cover designer, and Stuart and I have been, I suppose we go back 3 or 4 years now. A little story before we get into the interview. When I started doing self-publishing with The Black Mile and The Imposter, the first 2 books that I published myself, I got a very, very talented artistic friend of mine who actually painted covers for me based on the kind of pulp covers of the 1950s, and they're really beautiful. You can see how good they are. The artwork appealed to me. I thought it was great, but that didn't necessarily mean that it was translating for potential readers, and of course that is the main goal of having a great cover, is to persuade people to give your books a chance and to purchase them and read them. So I stepped back and I decided that I'd try and find someone to do a re-jacketing job on these books for me. And I came across Stuart Bache. I don't remember exactly where it was now. I think I probably saw another cover that I liked and then kind of reverse engineered it and found my way back to him. And I asked him to do the covers, or new covers, for the 2 traditionally published books that I'd had published in 2000. And those covers the originals are absolutely awful. I would swear, apart from we'll get the explicit tag for the podcast, and I'd rather avoid that. But they were really dreadful. Stuart took a look at them, agreed with me, and then produced 2 covers that I just thought were stunning. I think he drew those ones for me. They're very, very commercial. The books immediately started to sell. And I was very happy to then commission him to work on those Soho Noir books that I mentioned, and then eventually the John Milton books. And he's done all of my covers since then, so probably, 15 covers, I guess, something like that, all in all. He's also commissioned by Amazon, Thomas & Mercer, to work on my the books that I sold to Amazon. And, he's got loads of experience. He worked in the traditional industry for ages, as he'll say in the interview. And then last year branched out, went solo, and has been just completely knocking it out of the park with his new business. We're delighted to be able to work with him and delighted to bring this interview as well.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a lovely guy as well, Stuart, and couldn't happen to a nicer guy, but he's very focused on commercial success. And just in case you're wondering, we kind of split the interview into two. So half of it is about using somebody like Stuart and how he approaches his work and how he ensures that the cover is going to do the job, as Mark was referring to, rather than just look pretty. The second half of the interview is actually about people who haven't quite got the pockets yet to employ a professional like Stuart. And Stuart brilliantly and very charitably talks through the process and the sort of things that you can do if you want to do a bit of design yourself.
One thing worth mentioning is that Stuart is actually involved in our Self-Publishing 101 course, and he's actually delivering a module on cover design, and I've looked at the bits he's put together today, and it's absolutely brilliant. Almost worth whatever we would decide to charge for the course in itself. So I suppose an excuse for me just to say that if you want to get on the wait list for that, just go over to selfpublishingformula.com and you can sign up. But that is definitely going to be something to look forward to.
Yep, we'll give you a little update on where we are with 101 if you're interested in that after the interview. Let's hear from Stuart. Well, hello, Stuart Bache, and welcome to the Self-Publishing Formula podcast. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Stuart.
Thank you, James. Thank you for asking me.
You are should we say the illustrator-in-chief to Mark Dawson?
Yes, that's true.
Probably
he's very own art director.
Yeah, exactly. He's such a star now as an art director. Probably has a trailer with makeup in it.
He does.
Well, let's talk in a little bit more detail about what you do and how you do it. So there's two things I'd quite like to get out of this interview, I think, one is the creative process, how you approach it, what sort of information you need from a client, and how you create the end product, how that whole system works.
Sure.
The other thing that we'd like to talk about, how people can do this themselves, some advice from a professional about how they might approach, because not everybody can afford
of course.
A design service, certainly at the early stage of their careers. But let's start, first of all, with you as working with and for an author. So what information do you get from an author, and then how do you translate that into something that they're going to be happy with?
Well, it's something that I've had to learn over years. So I've worked in the industry for over 10 years now, and the things that I picked up from briefs that were written, when I worked at HarperCollins and places like that, the most important things I used to pick out of those briefs were, other than the synopsis, it's obviously very important to know what the book's about, but places and objects and character traits. It's very important actually to have an idea of what the landscape's going to be. But I would say most important to me is comparative and competitive titles. So other covers that are out there that fit within the genre of your book, your novel or non-fiction even, because this gives me an idea of what I'm designing for. So what I'm designing against, what I'm trying to stand out from, and also what genre I'm fitting into. Because the most important aspect, I think, about design is, especially book design, is familiarity, especially when it comes to trade and mass market fiction.
So you're thinking quite commercially from the beginning. Who's the competition? What are they doing? And how is this design going to stand out and catch the eye ahead of its competition?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know for the vast majority of people, I'll be designing ebooks, so it'll be on places like Amazon and places like that. But I have learnt from places like Waterstones in the UK, bookstores like that, how they actually sell their books and how they place them on shelves and on their tables. And they all base it on familiarity. A book cover will be sitting there, a book will be sitting there next to books that are similar actually aesthetically as well as what's inside the books, because it makes people who may have bought that book look around those other books and think, okay, well, if I like this one, then I'll like that one. And that's how it works when we shop. It's a split-second emotion or thought when we see something that we like. And if there's a familiarity to it, things like Lee Child, there are many books that look very similar to Lee Child for a good reason. And that is because they have similar content, or because someone wants someone to feel a similar emotion to it. That is that if you like Lee Child, you will like this book as well.
And so you start from that point of view. You also,
Yes.
presumably, sometimes the author may have a fixed idea of what they want, or do they more than often come to you and look to you to generate some creative ideas from scratch?
I think it can be a mixture. I mean, a lot of the time, people want, when they are hiring any professional, you want them to be the person who comes up with the ideas and to actually put the whole thing together. But yeah, obviously you do occasionally get someone who has already got a very firm idea in their mind of what they want, because they obviously, when you're writing, and one of the reasons you start writing probably is because you enjoy a certain author or a certain genre and you want to be part of that. And of course, you're going to have a lot of those books and a lot of those covers. So you probably got a good idea yourself what sells and what works well and what you like. From my perspective, I think that's great. I like to have ideas, and obviously an author who's going to know a book better than the person who's written it. I also would always throw in my own concepts as well, based on what I think is working and what's doing really well this year, and what's popular.
And then your next step then, so you've had this conversation, you've done a bit of research in the market. You then will do what? Do you put together one design and get some feedback at an early stage, or do you put together 3 or 4 ideas for somebody?
Always a minimum of 3, and that's how I work to. I mean, sometimes it will be more, but I always do at least 3 concepts, and they will be different as well. So they'll use different typography, different colors, a completely different concept. I try my best to give a variety, and hopefully, if maybe one of the ideas isn't exactly right, then maybe there's something in one of them or all of them which will spark the next stage of the process.
You've got a great website, stuartbache.co.uk, and you've got quite a selection of designs. There are some, I have to say, some really standout, fabulous designs that you've worked on in the past. The one that really catches the eye is the twin girls, the S.K. Tremaine, the Ice Twins novel, and one of them slightly fading, and it's a beautifully put together cover. How did that come about?
Well, it was quite lucky, really. You never know how things are going to work. I was working at HarperCollins at the time, so I was senior designer there, and the brief came on my desk. And occasionally we'd all work on a few different similar projects. And the main crux of the novel is it's not quite thriller. It's not actually supernatural, but there is a sense of both of those things. So I looked, as I always do, at what was out there and what I'd be fighting with and against. And there's people like Peter May and Peter James and people like that who the type style is very bold, and there isn't a lot of effect on it. It's just very strong bit of typography. And then the image is usually muted with a strong color. So it's a very, very basic start, but that's where I started from. And then obviously the story is about these 2 girls, twins, who one passes away, and the family move to an island up in Scotland, I believe, to a lighthouse. And there's a sort of twist about whether, I mean, this is on the back of the cover, so I'm not spoiling anything here.
No.
There's no spoilers. But the one girl, it's a case of which one died, and why did the one twin die over the other, and that kind of thing. So it kind of had a nice sort of, I felt like it felt like a bit of a TV feel to it. There was a sort of movie, BBC drama kind of feel to the design. That's what I tried to add anyway, a sort of an extra element. And a bit of narrative, which I think is important.
Yeah, well, I absolutely love that design, and I'm sure that S.K. Tremaine would have been delighted with it as well, because it's...
Yeah, well, it was a bestseller. It was a bestseller twice.
Well, I'm going to say, Stuart, I think your design probably contributed to that, because it's difficult to take your eyes off that and not think that you want to know more, which I guess is a key message you want to give out in your book cover.
Yeah, of course.
I also should mention you've got some pretty big names on this. So John le Carré, which I guess you were doing whilst you were at HarperCollins, was that?
I was at Hodder and Stoughton when I was a junior, actually, so it was a long time ago.
But you did the cover for one of his most famous novels, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Yes.
That's a big responsibility, isn't it? Someone hands you that.
Yeah, it was massive. Like I say, I was a junior at the time. My art director had been working on John le Carré for years, but he, being the art director, had loads of other things. He'd worked on them several times, so he just wanted to get a fresh approach, I think. So I got a chance to work on the list. It's quite a large list as well, but it was great. It was actually fantastic. I got to meet him. David Cornwell, who's John le Carré's real name, but I'm sure everyone knows that. But I got to meet him and have one of the books signed, which was fantastic. So, yeah, that was really good. It's kind of different. It's I think it was probably the first project that I'd ever worked on that took me from being just, brand new in the industry to actually a couple of people talking about my projects.
Coming onto the radar within your field.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Well deserved as well. And a master storyteller, John le Carré. I know that Mark will be holds him in great esteem, as I think all the authors in that genre do. So one of the grandees of it. Okay, well, let's move into a little bit more detail then. So you've done quite a few book covers now for Mark. In fact, not too dissimilar to the concept of the Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy cover.
In a sense, yeah.
You use this sort of central figure. There's a slight mystery about him, and we know that Mark's main character, certainly on his male books, his John Milton books, it becomes an increasingly kind of conflicted and flawed character. And I think I've noticed in some of the later covers, there's a slight dishevelment to him as well. This is not the James Bond guy. This is the slightly in the shadows of humanity almost, flawed guy. And that even comes across. So I guess those little bits of detail, they try and tell the story as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I try to get a setting, and Mark's very good at that. So Mark, I think we've learned from each other in that respect that he knows very much what he wants, but he's always very happy for me to create and to try something new and different. And there is an evolution in his covers, and from the very beginning when we worked together many years ago to how they are now, to now they are so much more refined. And a lot of that is because we know how to what our conversation is going to be. We know how to communicate what we want and what he wants and how I can do it. So, it's got to the point now where he just pretty much tells me a brief synopsis and tells me the places and how he kind of wants John Milton to be, and as you say, he was suited and booted very, very early on, and a lot of that's to do with, which is probably a bit of a tangent, I'm afraid, but it's sort of that's to do with where I can source my images from, and when you're working with independent authors, there's a price limit, unfortunately, because the big stock image sites like Archangel are fantastic, but they are expensive. And there are limited use on what you can do with the photographs, whereas Shutterstock is global and it's reasonably priced. And that's where I tend to go. However, we have now got to a point where I know exactly what he wants and I know who John Milton is, I think. So with that, he gives me a few details and there is a familiarity. There is a similarity to maybe John le Carré. There also is a similarity to people like Joe Nesbo and other authors like Lee Child, the figure, the lone wanderer, and the landscape. But I think what we try to do is maybe add a little bit more narrative than they do.
Okay. I noticed you used the weather. In fact, I was thinking there's a strong similarity between the way you approach a book cover that a good director of photography or a good film director will do in using things like landscape and weather to tell the story. So everything visually is telling a story, and that's the weather's very emotive, isn't it? It can be very emotive.
Oh yeah, completely. I've got folders of all sorts of different skies, thunder, mostly cloudy, with dark and ominous. That tends to be. It sets the mood straight away.
Is that because an author never comes to you and says, "I've got this great book. It's beautiful day. Everything works out really well, and everyone lives happily ever after. Can you do a cover?" And that never happens. That conversation.
Never happens.
No.
Yeah, I was known for a while for doing the thrillers and crime. So yeah, pretty much I am set up and ready to put any thriller or commercial crime fiction together in not very long actually. Yeah. I've got folders worth of clouds and landscapes and mountains and guns.
Ominous.
Ominous.
Portentous.
Yeah. That's exactly.
Okay, so you touched on. Let's move into, as I say, into the practical side a little bit more. You touched on using stock libraries. So in terms of your assets, it's also in the old days you used to say to an artist, "What medium do you work in?" And they'd also watercolors or oil or photography. But of course, it's done digitally now, and that means that really any kind of aesthetic is available to you. And some of your covers are almost cut out, I notice, look like sort of cut out prints. Others are quite clearly photographs, at least in the early stage. So you source these assets from elsewhere, or do you create some of these from scratch?
I'm probably going to be hated for this because I love Photoshop. I absolutely adore it. I do a huge amount of my work in there, and if I need to, I can cut out things and I'll draw things and I'll paint things. But I'm not a traditionalist. I am a commercial designer. So when it comes to digital, I will try my best to create something that looks as realistic as possible using photography or print techniques or anything like that. But it will be almost entirely digital. And I probably shouldn't, like I say, admit that. But
so when you say that, for those of us uninitiated in this creative process, what are the less commercially minded, the more sort of traditional competitors of yours doing? Are they working at a drawing board, moving bits of cardboard around?
I'd say some of them are. There are a lot of very, very talented book cover designers out there, and very well-known ones as well, that they will paint every bit of typography. They will hand draw every illustration, and that's fantastic. I mean, you know where your limits are, and I know as a previous freelancer, when I was a freelancer a long time ago, I had to learn how to be more than just a commercial designer. I had to be a bit of an illustrator as well, and so I tried to, when I couldn't physically do those things, I taught myself how to do or get as close as possible to those versions of illustration, whether it's a painting technique or an illustrative technique, using Photoshop or Illustrator and other Adobe applications.
Well, we use them as well, if it makes you feel better. And so I'm a big fan as well, and I'm certainly nowhere near as expert as you are on Photoshop. But that does bring me on to the final part, really, of nuggets from you. It's been fascinating so far, by the way, Stuart. And that is how people can perhaps do this themselves. I mean, Photoshop is a very accessible bit of software, particularly with Creative Cloud. You can sort of fairly low monthly payment and have access to it all. So, I mean, is this something that is accessible to an author? I guess it does depend on their level of competency and confidence with the sort of thing that you're talking about, Photoshop.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, confidence, as with anything, comes with time, doesn't it, and experience. So I think to start off, I would always recommend simplicity, not to push themselves too much. Do what I mentioned earlier, and have a look at what your comparative and competitive titles are, and see what's out there. Shutterstock is available to everyone, and just start to pick out things that you think are relevant. I'd say don't dive into the deep end and just try and think that you're going to create something that is exactly the same as what a professional could do, but have two things in mind, which is simplicity. Know what your typeface is. Don't try and be too creative with it. It doesn't need to be that. All you're doing is trying to inform people. And familiarity, again, layouts and everything, they're all out there. You just go into a bookshop and you can see what works and what doesn't work, what stands out to you, and then try and emulate it.
I mean, that simplicity, that comes across with a lot of your covers. There is this beautiful, clear, clean aesthetic, isn't there? And that's obviously something you favour.
Yeah, absolutely. From when I was at university, I was always into type, but I was into type in a very traditional way, which was the whole point of it is to tell a person something. I worked in branding for a little while as well, and it's all about communication. And these beautiful fancy type fonts are lovely, but especially when they're brought down to the size that you'd see on Amazon, you can't read them. So if you want to sell your book, then be clear, make it simple, and use images that work within your genre. I think that's probably the best thing.
And on a more practical level, Stuart, what sort of resolution, what sizes are you working
of course. in? I actually personally work in 350 DPI, which is more than enough for anyone really. But print, if you're ever going to go to print, which can happen and often does, you start off with an ebook and then one day you decide that you want to make it print on demand, whether it's with CreateSpace or someone like that. So that is print resolution. 300 DPI is print resolution. It's the option that you get when you open Photoshop and you start a new file. You can find what format. So it depends who you're who you're working with your ebook, who you're publishing through, and who's creating it and everything. But they'll tell you what format they want it to be, and you work it to those dimensions. They usually give you pixel dimensions because of it being ebook, which is RGB. However, I always work in CMYK, which is the print colors, because when you switch from RGB to CMYK, you lose the vibrancy of RGB. You can have fluorescent colors in RGB that you will never get in print. So if you don't want to be disappointed, work in CMYK as much as possible. 350 dpi is 50 dpi more than you need, but it also means that if you ever need to make it larger, then you can. So it just gives you that little bit of leeway. That's just a personal preference that I've been using for the last couple of years. Seems to work so far.
And do you work in a larger size, almost like putting, if your image on Amazon is going to be 400 by 100, let's say, do you work at 4,000 by 1,000 and then reduce it afterwards so that you've got that detail, or how does that work?
Yeah, I work in a slightly larger size. I've found that most publishers or most online retailers require, I think the height has to be 2,500, so 2,500 pixels. That seems to be the average minimum. So I tend to keep everything to that size, to that height at least, or larger, and then cut down. And once again, like I say, 350 dpi, which works. Rather than, because you can use 72 dpi, but it really doesn't matter when it's based on pixels. Rather than dots per inch.
Yeah, because they are what they are, aren't they? So 300 by 100 it is that. So, and I guess working slightly larger does give you those options later. If you say, as you say, you want to become a print author at some point, you've got the size to work with. The CMYK, that's interesting. I mean, this is to lots of people, and we are all of us. I mean, I'm a wannabe author as well, and we are all of us having to learn in this day and age, having to learn lots of specialist areas, little bits of specialist areas to try and survive and grow and flourish in this day and age. The old compartmentalized lives that perhaps our parents lived are gone, aren't they? So, but it is nonetheless still a lot of people will not have heard RGB and CMYK necessarily before, so it's a lot to learn. In fact, I hadn't really properly clicked what CMYK was until earlier this year, and I had to, in another life, I do some work at a school, and I had to prepare a advert to go in a newspaper. And they asked for CMYK, and funny enough, I, without thinking about it, I'd created the layout in RGB, and exactly what you just predicted happened. I was suddenly looking at this very washed out version of the advert I'd created, and I couldn't work out why, but listening to you talk about it, I thought it's because I'd started an RGB and done the conversion afterwards, which it actually might be, but actually CMYK is a different set of colours that just not as vibrant as the ones you're going to get in RGB, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because RGB is all it's ever going to need is your screen. So, and your screen has, as anyone will know when they're working on their computer, when you're playing games or whatever, it's all sorts of different colours. But unfortunately, CMYK, it's 4 colours. So if anyone doesn't know, it's cyan, magenta, yellow, and the K stands for black. I think maybe because if it was B, people would think it was blue. I don't know, but that's what it is. And that's just been the standardised print for many years. If you see, on a side note, if you ever go into a bookshop and you see vibrant colours, that colour is a separate colour. They're called Pantone Colors. They are picked and mixed, especially and it's technically a 5th colour along with CMYK. Right. But that is they cost more money and they're rare, and most independent authors won't have unfortunately won't get the chance to use something like that, especially if they're just printing, print on demand. So it will just be the standard CMYK.
And I think this stuff's important because actually when they're the tones you're going to get, working with that from a design, a creative point of view right from the beginning, because you can they can look great, those slightly suppressed colours, and can work very well to create the atmosphere that you want, but not necessarily if it's a surprise to you at the end, having designed something. Yeah, because I can see looking at a lot of your book covers, you can see that slightly flatter version of colours, but it works very well and very atmospheric.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that obviously there is a time and place for RGB. I have a lot of Mark's covers, in fact, because it has to be RGB when you convert it for an ebook. You have to convert it to RGB because CMYK just wouldn't upload properly. So I hope that doesn't confuse things. But I work in CMYK in the main file, but when I'm actually creating the final JPEG for the ebook, I will convert it to RGB because it has to be. JPEGs have to be RGB when you're uploading them to the internet, even if it's just onto your computer or onto your Facebook page. It has to be RGB. Cmyk wouldn't work, but I always do it for the main reason being, one, the colors, but two, in case we ever have to do a print version of anything.
Yeah.
But I will boost the colors for some of Mark's, so that in the Ninth Step, for example, is a very vibrant green that you would never get Cmyk. But that's because it's, it looks wonderful as an ebook. It won't look like that in print, I can promise you. But yeah, so there's times and places for it.
Stuart, thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, James.
Without question, we'll be speaking to you again. But yeah, we always look forward to seeing your work and your covers.
Wonderful. Well, I enjoy it, and I look forward to working with everyone. Everyone I've worked with so far on SPF have been fantastic. So I hope you enjoyed me rambling for a little bit.
No rambling at all. It's been golden.
Okay.
Thanks, Stuart.
Good.
So yeah, I think it's very easy to hear now, listening to Stuart, why his covers are successful. And it's not about, as you say, it's not self-indulgent. You'd think some people paint and use Photoshop in his case, to create graphics, and they're doing it out of a sort of sense of, this is what I want, like a sculpture. I create this lovely sculpture, but actually that's no use to us, as you said before the interview. And what Stuart does is he thinks, how's this book going to work? How's it going to work in a bookshop? How's it going to work on a shop front? And I love the way, in fact, I've got a privileged position because he's designed a cover for my as yet unfinished book. And the way he started that straight away is he said to me, what books do the readers you want to buy your book, what books do they read at the moment? And we started then, we started looking at those covers, and that process right from the beginning focused on sales.
Yeah, he really is exactly focused on sales, and he did the same thing for me with the Milton book. So he actually presented me like a 10 or 15 page PDF with analysis of all of the kind of the key players in my genre. So we looked at Lee Child, Peter James, Vince Flynn, guys like that, and Stuart then pulled from those the kind of the common tropes that were obviously being effective in selling those books, and then put them together into something that then became unique, and the effect of that has been fairly marked. It was one of the things that led to me having an extremely good year last year, is when I had this line of books that are clearly branded as being by me, and also fulfill all of the genre conventions of other books and that I'm competing with. So that was a really big moment for me, and Stuart is, as we've said before, is just extremely good at this kind of stuff.
Yeah, such a huge part of your book marketing, your book sales, your book cover. So an interesting subject. I promised you earlier that we'd have a little update on 101. I know we do get regular emails from people saying, have you selected your beta testers? Can I be a beta tester? Here are my qualifications, etc. A lot of enthusiasm for these spots. Just to say, we have not even begun that process. We're just transitioning literally this week from the pre-production, what I would call, from my video world, of planning, working out what's going to be where. And Mark is getting busy, as even busier than he normally is, turning that into actual material now, generating the content. So the presentations and screenflows and stuff's coming in from third parties. It's not just Stuart, as Mark mentioned. We've had stuff in from website developers this week as well, which is going to go into this course. And then after that, when we've got that ready, and that's not an easy task, as you can imagine, we will then be ready to move towards testing. So that's the point at which we're going to start selecting people to beta test. There's still an opportunity to put your name into the hat for that. And I know it takes a while, but we've been meticulous about the courses we've produced in the past. They've got to be thoroughbred courses that stand out on the platform of anything else is available, and that happens at this point when we research, when we build the course in the first place. But we're getting there, aren't we, Mark? Well, you're getting there.
We're getting there. Yeah, it's I'm just finishing. I've been working on the course kind of structure for the best part of 2 or 3 months. Yeah, we've secured some really fantastic additional instructors. I mean, mostly it will be me, but Stuart is doing covers. Brian Cohen is doing copywriting. We've got guys on website design. There'll be some other additional people coming along. I've started to collect some really valuable bonuses that will be added as well, and it is a question of me now finishing the novel that I was supposed to have submitted about 2 weeks ago, but that should be done tomorrow. And then from that point on, I'll be focusing 100% on actually recording the course, so taking the content that I've produced and then committing it to screen, so to speak. So looking forward to getting into that, because it's been bubbling away in my mind for quite a while now.
Yeah, an exciting bit. We're giving birth to the course now. Okay, good. Well, that's it. It's the 23rd of September, the release date for this. So I'm about to get on an aircraft to Los Angeles, and I think you're about to go home.
I suppose I probably am. Yes, that's right. I would be on my way home tomorrow.
But tanned from the, hopefully from the Florida sunshine, not hurricane. They have had a hurricane already. You noticed that?
Thank you.
Florida.
I didn't know that. I've been avoiding that studiously.
Yeah, they've had one. It was a category 1, it's a sort of stiff breeze in Florida terms. Just before we go, one more thing is Stuart has started a new venture, which is to use his artwork that he's produced as examples or testers for people and hasn't ever seen the light of day. And he's starting to upload that to a website to make his artwork and his book covers a little bit more accessible and a little bit more affordable to a wider audience, so that you can go and pick those off. And you'll add obviously your title and your author name to it, but it won't be bespoke for you. It'll be something that's not been used by anybody else, but it's been sat there in his folder. And that's, I mean, apparently, Mark, I think it's working really well for him, but we should give out the URL for that, shouldn't we?
We should, and so those are called pre-mades in the business, and Stuart's pre-mades are better than most people's bespoke covers, so highly recommended. The price is very, very reasonable, and I'm saying that with absolutely no horse in that race, or no dog in the fight. It's something that's just for Stuart, and you can, I think the URL is bookscovered.co.uk.
Yes, that is it. Bookscovered.co.uk is the affordable side of Stuart Bache, and as we say, thoroughly recommend Stuart. Lovely guy, fantastic covers, and very commercially orientated, which is what you want from your cover designer. Okay, that's it. Thank you again for listening. We'll have that special from Florida next week, and we look forward to talking to you then.
You've been listening to the Self-Publishing Formula podcast. Visit us at selfpublishingformula.com for more information, show notes, and links on today's topics. You can also sign up for our free video series on using Facebook ads to grow your mailing list. If you've enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review on iTunes. We'll see you next time.